Alright, these are the components for a Pente Blinky. Penta for 5, Blinky because you can make it blink. Here's the board. Fairly simple. We have 5 LEDs, 5 resistors, a processor chip, a programming header, and a reset button. And this up here is to be able to solder in power for the board. And I think I'm going to make a multicolored flashlight out of this, just to keep it relatively simple. And I'm going to set it up so it has red, green, blue, white, and ultraviolet in the settings. And I have those in LED form set up here. Now of those, all of the LEDs, the red one is the lowest voltage. So I'm using a 220 ohm resistor. That's a red, brown. And then I'm using 3 150 ohm resistors, which is a brown, green, brown for the color codes there. And because I'm going to have red in pin 1, and I'm going to go ahead and start assembly with the resistors first. Go like that, set them in. And then here on the circuit board, my pin 0, or my 0, lines up with, I have them marked underneath the resistor here, and down on the LED here. So that one's going to be my my 100. I want to spread the legs on those just a little bit. And then the rest of these I'm going to use a 150 ohm resistor on. And that should be, I'm just going to bend those over like that and drop them in place. I'm going to flip them around so that it's a little bit easier to read the color codes from the top. Now resistors aren't polarized components, so the order I'm putting these in doesn't really matter, other than aesthetically I find it prettier if they're lined up so that the color codes are easy to read. So it's just a pretty thing. Alright, so those are those. I'm going to use those same values. Most of the LEDs, the ultraviolet is the highest voltage, followed by the white, and then the blue and the greens. But they're all fairly close, and I'm not setting these up to drive them really hard. So I have all my resistors in place, and my resistors are my lowest component to the board. So when I flip these over and solder them in, I can just use the surface I'm soldering on to keep them nice and level. Got a finger in there. And I can go ahead and solder that like so. And then the next one. That's a little hard to see right there, but basically I'm just soldering those in like so. And then I'm going to flip it around to get the other end. Get my finger in there so that I can keep the board relatively close to level. And, whoops, there we go. And like so. Alright. Now I've got one lead on each resistor soldered in, and they're all still relatively tight to the board. And now for my own convenience, I'm going to go in here with my angle cutters and clip the leads I just soldered so that those pins are not in my way anymore. And likewise on the other side. I do the same thing, grabbing the leads so that when I clip them, the leads don't go everywhere. And then I'm going to reflow the pins that I just cut so they make little round balls, and it gets rid of all the sharp edges. Well, most of them. It's not always perfect, but it helps. So those are now much less sharp. And then I'll go in and I'll solder the... So now I can put my finger down there without getting in the way of the... Now, yeah, I could use my alligator tool for my extra hands to make this a little easier on me. I'm going to go ahead and clip those. But the flip side of that is that not everybody has those, and so I want to show that it can be done without them. Alrighty, now I'm going to get those clipped nice and short. I'm going to come in and reflow those solder pads, make them nice round ones rather than sharp jaggy ones. Like that. Now all my resistors are in place. Nice and pretty. Okay. Next tallest component is this chip. Now, before I've used a technique where I go in here with my thumbnail and push those pins in a little bit, like so, and get that chip in there, and that worked great this time. So now that chip is in place, and now I can, let me get a little bit more solder to play with so I don't burn my fingers. Again, I'm using an extra finger there and that's just not working for me. There we go. Holding it down with one finger while I'm using my other ones to hold it steady. Now, if that's not really working for you, then you can just go ahead and pull out the alligator tool. I think you can get them at various stores. Now Harbor Freight carries them. Not expensive ones, but hey, they don't have to be super high quality to get the job done. Now I'm going to go in and put my finger over it so when I clip I don't get those little leads going everywhere. There we go. And now I'm going to go in and retouch the solder on those just to make them nice little round balls. Gets rid of some of the sharpness of the pins. There we go. So now we've got a chip. That comes next. Got a nice little thing there. And I don't normally point this out. I didn't really pay that close attention. It's lucky I got it right. I've got the dot on the chip right here on this corner, and underneath I have a little round dot there to make sure things line up. I should have mentioned it earlier, but you get doing a whole bunch of these and you just do it. You don't think that much about it. The switch pops in there. The switch actually has little bends in the leads that make it so that the leads stay put better. And then I'm going to go ahead and put the solder in there. And then I'm going to go ahead and do the same on the other side of that lead. And then clip the extra height off those. And reflow. And that one didn't work quite as well because I get time to clean my soldering iron tip, I think. There we go. Well, okay. It works most of the time. And now those are not nearly as sharp as they would have been otherwise. Alright, so now we've got the reset button, programming header. Sometimes I want that, sometimes I don't. If I solder that in, I can go ahead and get that square. Do I want to put it in this time? See, if I don't, I can just use a couple sets of long headers like this, where they just are extra long, and that means I can plug them in. But I think I'm going to be putting this, fixing this down, so I think I'm going to want to have that. So I'm just going to hold that steady. I'm going to solder down one pin to make sure that's in place, and then I want to check to make sure it's all level. And if it's not, I'm going to go in here and just use my fingers a little bit. Notice I'm not touching the pin that's getting hot. To reflow the solder on that one pin so that I can get the rest of them all nice and straight. And at this point, it becomes a little bit trickier when I use this breadboard a little bit to just hold things as I go in and solder those other pins so that it stays put. Also a handy trick. Alright, so the programming headers are soldered in now. We got most of the board done. What's left is power and LEDs. Alright, now it's always a good idea to check your LEDs before you solder them in. Alright, that one is red and it works. And the short lead is definitely the grounding pin, which is strangely backwards from what the... Alright, so that's a little strange. Anyway, short lead is my negative pin. I'm checking it here, making sure that I'm putting it in the right direction so that I don't have to unsolder that and resolder it again, because it's a pain if they get them backwards. Alright. Now on the LED, I'm going to solder one hat pin, and then see how far that slipped. Now I'm going to push that in with my finger as I solder, and then that makes that nice and stable. So I can just solder in the other pin. Good to go. Trim the leads to get them out of my way. And then reflow one, let it cool. Reflow the other one, let it cool, and my first LED is in place. Alright, next one, test it, makes a nice green. I know my pin order. I put my pin in that way. And come back, same process. Gonna get the one pin in first. And as I look at that, I can see that that is, oops, too close. There we go. I can see that that is seated nicely, no gaps. So I can go ahead and solder in the other one. And then that pin's nice and in place. Trim off the leads. Reflow to get rid of the Sharpies. Wait for that pin to cool before I do the other one. There we go. Second one in place. Testing it. That's definitely a blue. Making sure to put the short lead down. Now, solder that pin in. There we go. I'm going to double check it to make sure that it is nicely seated and straight. It appears to be. Alright. And then I'm going to solder in the other one. Oops, there we go. Oh, you jiggled you. There we go. Reflow one and then the other one. Wait just a second, I'll make sure that it doesn't drop out. Alright, now I have a white LED. Now I'm using a fairly high, I think I'm using a 330 ohm resistor there when I'm testing these, because with a 5 volt supply and a 330 ohm resistor, even if I short the thing out, it's not going to get above my 20 milliamps for the LED, so it's nice and safe. I've also used a 1K ohm resistor in there to make sure that when I'm testing the LED, I'm not going to blow it up by accident. And that gives me a good idea of what the polarity is on it. And there we go. And then the last one. This one's an IR LED. Whoops. I almost did damage to that. And that's nice and purple. And that goes in that way. And then I can go ahead and solder that one in. And solder that one in. Now if perchance, look at that, and that worked out fairly well. If it hadn't, if that was a little bit off, I can still bring my soldering iron in here and heat up both pins with a good soldering iron and adjust it and reseat it. Didn't need to, just showing the technique that time. Really useful to know if your soldering iron can solder or heat up too. It's avoiding, you know. There you go. So that's all soldered together now, except for the power leads. And for my power, I've got this battery pack that I have. I'm going to put this in. And are used for this. Let's see, how do I want to run this? Well, I can always keep my leads a little longer. Alright, so what I'm going to do is, whoop, there you go. Sorry, I was probably off camera there for just a second. Alright, see these holes here? Those are for strain relief, which means if I can push my lead down through there, and then down through there, and then I'm going to go through the other side, and then go around like that, and then I'm going to go ahead and pull that loop through, just like that. I'm kind of guiding it with my thumb. Whoops, slightly too far. Let's try that again. Alright. Maybe I should solder them first. Yeah, maybe I will. I think I'll solder them first. Okay. Oop, I bumped you again. Okay, so I'm going to get my solder out. I'm going to solder that pin. I'm going to make sure it's relatively straight. There. Done soldered that lead in. I'm going to solder in the other one. Now I've got two holes here on the positive side. That's mostly to give me a couple options on what type of power I supply to it, because sometimes there's battery holders that have fixed pins that line up nicer with one side or the other. Now that I've soldered that through, I won't pull it through. I can just go like that, and that hole will give a nice little strain relief to there. And now I'm going to go ahead and twist this wire up to keep it nice and Neat. So it behaves itself a little better. And now, I think I'm going to set that right like that. Grab my hot glue gun. Drop down a bunch of hot glue. Careful not to burn my fingers. And just kind of wiggle that around a little bit, and then push it down. And now I have, mostly off camera there too. Okay, so that's hot glued in place now. I've got my cable, so it's kind of curling around. Stays nice and tight. And that's the assembly.